You thought it could be better? Yeah.
You take your time, bro. Like, thank you for tuning in. My name is Joel So-and-so. Today we're interviewing my boy Jason Acosta.
Oh.
He's a social worker,
Oh.
an educator,
Oh.
an adjunct professor. Today, he's going to be joining us today to talk about the urban public school system and a lot of the disparities that exist and lie within the education system.
Ooh, you already know. Oh, all right.
Just be you, bro. You go.
What's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in. Today, we're going to be interviewing my boy Jason Acosta. He is a social worker, a professor, overall educator, education advocator.
You got it right here, bro. What's poppin', bro?
Yo, thanks for coming on the show.
Of course.
Yeah, man. You know
Thank you
what I'm
for having me, man. Shout out to the Bronx.
Shout out to the Bronx. You already know, Burnside.
Brook Ave.
Burnside all day here.
The 6 and 4 train. We don't call it the Green Line, just for some of y'all new folks that are starting to change up the language.
Okay, my fault. All right. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I think that I look at you as one of the go-to people when it comes to New York City or urban education topics in general. Like, you're heavily involved in everything that's going on out here. But can you share with the audience a little bit about your background and what are some of the things that you are currently involved in?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for that. Appreciate the compliment. So, as you know, I grew up in the South Bronx, still live in the South Bronx, and my background's in social work, right? So the undergrad and grad school both is social work. But the reason that I started to pursue social work was really to try to figure out how to understand who I was at that time as a Latino male growing up in the South Bronx, right? I wasn't sure about what that meant. I also am a product of the foster care system, right? So for me, it was a lot of trying to figure out who I was. Like, I moved around a little bit, fortunately found a stable home, but was really just trying to get back to my roots. And so at the same time, I was dealing with the challenges of just growing up in the neighborhood that I was in, attending a public high school that had metal detectors and bars on the windows, right? And graduation, a lot of my peers didn't graduate with me, right? So I was just trying to figure out what all this meant and why that was the case. And so because I had so many questions when I got to undergrad, I took one class in social work, and it essentially exposed me to systems, right? And so I wasn't aware of it. I couldn't call out the challenges I was experiencing or what I was experiencing just growing up in general. And so I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know what it was. So long story short, as I started to really pursue social work and do my own research, I started to realize that a lot of the issues and challenges we faced in communities, in our communities in particular, were intentionally created. Right? So there are policies, there are laws that were put in place to keep us in the communities we're in, to create the communities we're in, and many of the other disparities and inequities that we experience just coming up in a place like the South Bronx. A lot of people don't really realize that what we're going through, we normalize as if it's okay. But it's not, and you don't really realize that until you start to really step out and see a different way of life and start to ask those questions. Well, what's going on? What happened here? So that's essentially my journey. That's how I ended up in social work. And as I started to realize that these things were man-made, all these issues, then I started to think, well, we need to do something about this. And how am I going to have the most impact? And for me, that was by trying to change systems.
Let's see, systems. We spoke about some laws that were designed or implemented on purpose in order to keep us in a certain situation within these communities. Can you speak more about what type of laws maybe you're referring to, and what type of systems that may have been designed in order to keep us down?
Yeah, for sure.
You want to say that?
So let's really think about like the history of this country, right? Let's start there. So in school, what do they teach us, right? They teach us that Christopher Columbus founded this country, right? They don't ever talk about the Native Americans that were here, or other indigenous people that were here, right? And so we start there, right? So we all already start by sharing one narrative, which is a white man's narrative, right? When we're looking at textbooks and talking about schooling. And so what we don't teach is the fact that him and other foreigners came into this country and essentially enslaved all the indigenous people that were here and committed complete genocide and used Christianity as his justification for doing so, right? So we already know that because that is a part of we are being taught in our schools that Christopher Columbus founded this country. That's already a line. That's already an issue, right? So we grow up hearing so many similar stories that leave us out of it and leave our history. And when I say our, I mean people of color, right? And so our histories are never taught in our public education or education in general. And so we continue to hear just this one narrative that we internalize, right? That impacts us, right? We'll start there. Now, let's fast forward. We talk about slavery in the 1600s, right? That within itself, we already know how that started, right? Again, white folks essentially going to Africa, right? And come like just enslaving folks and bringing them to this country, right? And so generally speaking, and we never talk about the fact that there were black people here that owned land already during that time. There's so much just left out of those conversations. You jump into 1700s for public school education. You think about just the Jeffersonian model of public school education, which only certain people were able to continue to move up the ladder, right? After elementary school, certain people were picked to move on to middle school, and certain people were picked to move on to high school, and so on and so forth, right? Fast forward, 1800s, boarding schools, Native Americans, right? Again, they were stripped from their culture and their identity and who they were, and essentially, this man named Richard Henry Pratt, who started this boarding school, wrote this speech that said, kill the Indian to save the man, and he started a boarding school to do exactly that and strip Native Americans from who they are, right? So this country has so much history of just kind of pushing people back, the Chinese Exclusion Act, right, and all these different things. As you continue to move on, you think about even the word marijuana, right? It was used. They changed the terminology to marijuana to associate it with Mexican immigrants that were coming into this country, right? So you kind of just continue on. Right? The history lessons are there. Essentially, is what I'm saying, right? Brown versus Board of Ed, 40,000 black teachers and administrators lost their jobs. Right, when we talk about busing, it was about black students being bused into white schools and communities. It wasn't the other way around. Black schools being shut down, right? So we talk about all these disparities that exist today, where New York City has the most segregated school system in the country, and Brown versus Board of Ed was 1954, I believe, right? So you think about all of these just different issues that come up, and then we wonder why we're in this situation. And I left out a ton, right? I mean, you talk about mass incarceration, right? You talk about the war on drugs, where federal government was actually like involved in some of that, but never like face any criminal charges for that, right? So there's so much out there that we think about, but essentially media narratives are created to connect folks to those things. You know what I'm saying? Makes sense? So now we talk about systems, we're talking about things that were designed for years that you have to figure out and understand and then change. And that's corporate America, that's schooling, that's nonprofit, that's tech companies. A lot of these things are really similar across the board.
Again, that was a lot. But yeah, I get it. I think one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show was because I'm creating this in order to serve primarily the Black and Latino community, right?
Yes, sir.
And so I think it's important for us to be aware of these issues, and even not only aware, but have a certain level, a deeper level of understanding, and some type of role or action that people could even be taking on a small scale to change these systems gradually, right? Or even fast, right?
Yeah.
When you spoke about going to school with metal detectors and stuff like that, so I went to middle school in the Bronx, on Burnside, MS390. Shout out to Mr. Mercedes.
Okay, shout out to Burnside.
Right, again. But although the school didn't have metal detectors, there was fights, like probably like literally at least 2, 3, maybe 4 fights every single day without fail, right?
Okay.
And like everyone there felt like you were in a prison, right? It was only Black and Latino students, predominantly either Dominican or Puerto Rican.
Yeah.
Right, and whether anyways, but what are your thoughts on that? What do you think? Obviously, you spoke a lot of the history from even stemming from hundreds of years ago. What do you think are some of the main challenges in order to change that? Those type of behaviors or issues that are going on in these schools like that.
Well, you got to think about it, right? The first thing you mentioned was like, or one of the first things you mentioned was you feeling like you were in a school that resembled a jail or a prison, right? So let's start there. What is going on? What are we creating in our school environments that essentially already look similar to what a jail may look like? Why is that a thing to begin with, right? You start looking at the environments that are created, then you start looking at discipline, right? Think of your experience growing up and you being in middle school, you being in high school, whatever. You come into the classroom, somebody might have their head down, right? They're tired. Teacher tries to tell that particular student, hey, pick your head up, pay attention, do your work, and that student is not really responding, but their head is down and they may be tired. What is the result of that? What usually happened in your experience to that particular student?
They'll get in trouble with something.
They'll get in trouble, right? They'll get in trouble. They'll get kicked out of class, right? Something happens because the student is tired. We don't know why.
Or teachers don't care and just be like, whatever, I'm getting paid anyways.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes say that. They actually voice that, right? Exactly. And so what we already see with just that communication between teacher-student is that there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect, right? Something is going on there where the teacher is not understanding what's going on with the student, and the student is not informing the teacher, right? There's a lack of relationship. But that's such a small example of what we do. We then tell that student, hey, get out of class. You're going to get detention. You're going to get X, Y, and Z. And so we continue to perpetuate these systems of discipline within our schools that make us feel like we're going to get in trouble for anything that we do, right? And so without really even knowing why, or we may want to explain the situation, but like you said, the teacher on the other end may be like, whatever, you still got to do this work, right? Or I'm going to get paid regardless, so it doesn't matter, right? And so you start to really think about what that looks like and what that turns into. You skip detention, what happens? Suspension, in school, out school, right? You don't come to school with your uniform, what happens? Disciplinary action, right? So it's like there's so many ways to be disciplined within the school system. And so what that ultimately does is, and we're not even talking about intersectionality either, right? Because if you start to look at subgroups, folks who may be multilingual learners, undocumented students, right? Students who may be in special education, those numbers start to even look even higher, right? But then you kind of just continue these patterns of kicking students out, suspending students, essentially, and that kind of leads into a narrative that tells me that I can't even learn. My uniform may be more important for me than me being in school, or that me not eating the day before or staying up late for whatever reason, me coming to class tired, like no one really cares about what's going on in my life, so why should I care about what's going on here right now? But I made it to class, right? So that tells you I want to learn, but what's going on? Where's the disconnect? What's happening?
I mean, or maybe the student even doesn't want, because I was one of those students where it's like I got to the point where I didn't care about school anymore. I ended up dropping out, actually.
Yeah.
My senior year of high school, I ended up moving to the Dominican Republic.
I didn't even know that.
Yeah.
I didn't even know that.
And I moved out there for a few months, and when I was out there, I saw a lot of everybody over there want to be on this side of the world, taking advantage of opportunities, and so that made me a lot more appreciative of the resources that I had out here. And so when I got back out here, it was like gold time. Like I got my GED, went to BCC, did the ASAP program, then I went to Baruch, graduated from there, et cetera, right? So, but yeah,
just like, right, I think what it sounds like too, right, is what is the engagement? I'm coming to school. This teacher's boring. He or she don't understand me. What are we learning? I gotta learn this curriculum to pass a test, right? And like this, it's not fun. And so I think a lot of what the movement looks like in urban education is reimagining what that space looks like, and it's really thinking about what it means to teach for liberation, right? What does it mean to have education that actually frees you? Versus continues to perpetuate many of the narratives that we spoke about earlier about who founded the country, right? And just like who we are as people of color that exist in this country and what people say about us, right? You think about all these different social issues, right, and who's connected to them and all the negativity that comes around it. We never ever hear the other side of that. And so I think if you're creating a classroom space that's inclusive of the students that are in there, that stuff might change. Right, I'll give you an example. I'm an adjunct professor at 2 different schools, right? And so I'm always playing music in my school. Like first day of school, students are walking in, I'm playing music that I like, and 9 times out of 10 they know, right? And like too, and they come in there just bopping. They don't know. I didn't even introduce myself. They don't know who I am.
You're the professor.
Yeah, and it's always like I look young, so they're like, "Yo, you're the professor." You know what I'm saying? And some of my students are way older than me. Right? I had a student come tell me, he was like, "I could be your dad." I'm like, "Yo, that's what's up." You know what I mean? And so, just that whole, it's just different. The energy that I bring, right? Sometimes I'm dead tired. I'm tired. Like I come from work and I'm like, man, I'm not trying to be in this classroom right now. And then I walk in there and I know that if I don't bring energy into this space and my students are tired because they had a long day, oh, it's over. I lost them. So I try to find every bit of energy I have to engage them, to have fun with them, but also to teach them the tools and resources that allow them to continue to build and question things, right? I think that's the biggest piece, because a lot of times, just us growing up as students, we automatically see the teacher as an authoritative figure, and whatever the teacher tells me, I'm gonna believe, whether that's like curriculum, whether that's like just anything that has to do with this relationship, right? And so because this teacher is up there and they're the expert, I don't question anything. Right? And so one thing I always tell my students in class is like, yo, am I qualified to be up here teaching you? Yes, but I'm not an expert on all these things, right? So I may say certain things that are incorrect, and if you feel that way, yo, challenge me. It's okay, right? Like say a professor, I think you tripping right now because I was taught boom, 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 and I'm like, oh, you know what? That's a great point. Let's talk about this, or let's come back to this, or let's figure it out, right? And or how do you bring students into the front of the room and help them facilitate class with you? You know what I'm saying? So it's like really thinking about how to be creative and include them in their own education. That's what we're trying to figure out, right? That's what starts to change some of the disconnect and the disengagement that was going on.
So, just to give a little bit more background on the audience about yourself.
Yeah.
Jason right now is playing a big role in bringing men of color into the classrooms as teachers.
Yeah.
Right? Working within the system, within the DOE. Although you're not here representing the DOE right now, right? Putting that disclaimer out there.
Yes, disclaimer.
But can you talk to us a little bit about that and the importance of that?
Boom. I love the question.
Ooh.
So, love the question. Let's think about this for a second. Across this country, only 2% of educators identify as black males. 2%. Think about how small that is, right?
It's crazy.
And so, it's crazy. And so, as you think about that, right, you start to think about who's in your classroom. right? Like, who are the students that in New York City, in your own experience, make up the majority of the class, right? You said earlier you went to school with students that look predominantly like
you either black or
Latino, Latinx,
Latino,
right?
yeah.
Exactly. And so a lot of our here in New York City, right, about 80% of our students identify as students of color, right? But our teachers are predominantly white. And it reflects just urban education across the country, right? What does that look like? Or just the teaching force across the country. And so when we think about that, we start to think about all the disparities and things that we kept referring to. And we spoke about discipline. We spoke about the disconnect that lies within. We spoke about being bored or not wanting to be in school. Like, why aren't you motivated to be? We spoke about all these things. We know the data shows us that you having a teacher that looks like you makes a world of difference. Just by you standing up there and reflecting me. You ain't even talked to me yet. You know what I'm saying? So as we start to really look at that and the impact of that, we know that it is important to continue to diversify school systems. And so, and even further, to bring in people that come from the same communities that you come from, right? So now you have a teacher who not only looks like you, but understands you, may have had similar experiences. They're not going to kick you out of class because your head is down or you had a bad day the day before, or you may be lashing out because you're frustrated today, but yesterday you was cool, you were all cool. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a need just to change that, right? It's just to show our students that, like, they too can become teachers, right? Because teaching and just being an educator in general, I think, is one of the most important roles, if not the most important role, because you're setting up young people for the rest of their lives, right? And you are that person that's able to feed knowledge, resources, and tools to the people who are going to essentially take over in the next several years, right? They're the future. Without them, we don't really have much. So I think it's important, and I think it's important for them to see themselves reflected in that in education.
Okay. I know you're still putting together all of the strategy on how to implement that plan right now, so I don't know if you want to talk about any of that, but I know you're also doing some work around with the police. Right? The popo.
Yeah. Yeah.
You got a Y on you?
Yeah. Yo.
Nah.
So,
yeah. Talk to us a little bit about that. What I even mean by that.
Yeah. So again, like, for me, a lot of what I do really just relates back to the challenges I experienced, right?
Yeah.
When I was 16, I experienced police brutality, right? I was arrested, got funneled into the criminal justice system, and
what do you mean police brutality, though? Talk a little bit.
Oh, like I got smoked by police brutality.
What do you mean smoked?
Like they beat me. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Like 6 officers. We were in a situation in after school, and essentially was just trying to get out the situation and get some of my friends out, and it just kind of turned bad. And so officers, like, I essentially just kind of, somebody grabbed me. I didn't know who it was. I essentially, like, pushed them off me, and then boom, it was a wrap. Like, you know what I'm saying? Game time. And so they started, just hitting me or whatever, and it was probably like 5 or 6 officers, and then got arrested, sent to jail, whatever. And fortunately was able to, figure that situation out, and I'm good. But every encounter I had with officers growing up were always negative.
Question. So you're 16. And you have 6 officers beating you up, punching you, and all of that.
Kicking me in my dome, all that.
Do you think if you were Caucasian, you think that would have played out like that? What are your thoughts?
First of all, I think that just the very beginning of the encounter would have been different, right? So just somebody grabbed me, right? And that can happen to anybody, like, in the situation we were in general, right? But what I think is different is that they see me as anybody else that's in the hood that they have encountered that may be doing, like, something negative, right? So they put that same image on everybody. And so it didn't matter that I was, like, in National Honor Society, or that I was in academic programs, or that I was going to a pre-college program that summer. None of that mattered. For them, they saw a Latino male who was in the middle of a big fight, to them, that's just everyday practice that they see and experience, and they just did and reacted the way they normally would, right? When they see somebody that looks like us in the neighborhoods that we grow up in. And so that's what I think is the difference, right? You don't see officers targeting white communities. You don't see, when Stop and Frisk was around, you didn't see them stopping and frisking white folks. All of that stuff was majority targeting us. And so I think those narratives and images play a big role in that. And so that's what I honestly think it happened. They just see me as anybody else, just another person in the hood.
I think I want to put out a disclaimer because I think it's important. I want to communicate the fact that I'm assuming for both of us, if anything, like, it's one thing to be pro-black. I definitely consider myself being pro-black, but I'm not anti-white, right? There's a difference. I feel like people within our community sometimes are just straight anti-white and, are constantly looking all the time to try to bash white people. I'm against that, but I am for highlighting the differences that we experience and the inequities, et cetera, et cetera.
So I just have to touch on that real quick, right? Like, I think that in our communities, a lot of times we're not saying anything that's so much anti-white or anti-white. What we're trying to do is give ourselves a voice, right? To say this is our reality. And I think that what happens is as we continue to share our reality and understand our history and who we are, we become more prepared. We have more tools and we have more resources, and that becomes a threat to white society, right? So it's not us saying that, like, we want to, we're like anti-white or whatever. We don't want white folks to do well or acknowledge them or acknowledge their challenges or experiences. We want to do all that, right? But there's never been a lane for us to share our experiences and share our voice and empower each other, right? So I think that that's what a lot of those conversations are. It's not so much about being anti-anything. It's about saying, like, well, for so long we've been fighting for the same rights. Like, we need to continue to uplift each other and continue to share our voice despite however people feel about it, because it's the only way we're ever going to be able to move forward.
But there's other people who would also be on that wave, like, I don't mess with white people. You know what I'm saying? And I think that could be a bit counter to us moving forward.
Why do you think someone would say, I don't mess with white people?
I mean, why think that?
Why do you think that?
I mean, you already know.
I don't know. I need to share. And I'm going to tell you why I'm asking these questions.
Okay, yes.
After you.
And let me clarify, you already know. and it's because all of the historical points that you pointed out, right? All of the stuff that's happening today, whatever you want to say, stop and frisk policy, experiences, et cetera, because of all of those reasons. Yeah.
Right? So, again, I don't know. I think let's start here. I think it's important to always define things, right? That's why I asked. So, what does this mean? What does that mean for you? So that
you're a professor. You're the Bronx professor right here.
So that I'm aligned with you, right? So I I got you. Boom. Let's work. Right, but I think that what happens at times, and I'm not speaking for I don't know how people feel about different things, right? But generally speaking, what happens at times is we go through these different life experiences. We start to learn about systems. We start to learn about our own people. We start to learn about the history of this country, and we also see what's going on right now in our world of politics and a lot of things that are happening. And we experience it on a day-to-day basis in our workplaces often, right? And the spaces in which we navigate on a daily basis, and so that are surrounded by whiteness, right? And so I think that a lot of us continue to be triggered and traumatized by those experiences. And so as we continue to move on and navigate, etc., I think that we often have to think about that, right? So it's not so much saying that, I don't mess with white people, but it's saying that I need to learn this game for survival, right? Like, I need to know how to navigate these different spaces so that I can exist in the way that I want to exist and get the same opportunities and reach some level of equity and etc. So I think that it's more about like knowing what we've experienced, and based on our experiences, these are the things that could happen in the future, right? How do I prepare for these things? How do I prepare for these experiences? Some of that may mean I'm gonna stay away from this environment here, or I'm gonna be cautious when I step foot in this environment, and be on my P's and Q's and be prepared for it. You know.
No, yeah, there's a difference between I'm acknowledging what you're communicating right now, and I see what you're saying, but that's not what I was talking about. I'm talking about a specific group, like groups of people who are literally like not even saying any of that, talking just on some straight, like talking everything bad about white people, like not even on some like, okay, you know, you gotta do this in order to survive. You gotta wear a suit.
Just like complete bash.
Yeah, complete 1,000%. Like nothing. You know what I'm saying? That's the part.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree, right? I think that there are really, you're trying to figure out how to be unified to continue to fight for rights of everyone, right? Like, we're not free until we're all free, right? But it's also knowing how, even as males, right, when you're talking about power dynamics, like how do we use our own privilege and our own power to continue to be allies, co-conspirators, and fight for these equal rights and fight for equity and fight for all these things. So I think you're right? I think that we do have to kind of figure that out together, just like as people. And the reality is, like, we live in a real crazy world, man. And so, like, how do we continue to build off each other, empower each other, to fight for what we believe in?
Yeah, and this topic gets complicated.
Yeah, we know. Spans for decades.
And even within the whole Latino community, like you have the whole spectrum of colors going on, and
colorism within our community.
Yeah, like you Dominican, you black, you're not black. Like what's happening there is whatever. Yeah,
and it all comes down to colorism and race too, man. Oftentimes, but I think you're right. That's why I keep coming back to this. And especially for our Latinx folks, is like understanding your own roots and where you come from and who you are. I think part of this is really understanding those things, and the more and more you continue to explore your own identity and who you are, it will help you to start being able to understand some of these issues and identify, right? I think a lot of us don't take the time to really think about that. Like I always say that in order for you to really understand the young people or the people around you, you have to understand yourself first. And if you don't have a clear grasp on who you are, how can I expect you to understand the people that are in front of you or that you're teaching?
Okay, bars. Hashtag Bronx Professor.
You heard?
Yeah? Alright, so I know I was talking about that you're involved. You're working with the police right now.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you talk to. What do I mean by that? Like, talk. What's up? It's very interesting.
So just real recently, man. Again, coming back to challenges in the community, things we experience. There's a really dope documentary that's out on Hulu called Crime and Punishment. You should check it out. But it essentially highlights the injustices within the police department and the ways in which, quotas were used to target black and brown communities. And so it's a dope documentary because this real life, it shows you the reality, and so it highlights some of the precincts in our neighborhoods in the South Bronx, and there's officers who are sharing their story, right, who are still officers and continue to advocate for justice from within, right? Similar work to what we do, right? From within, right? Mm-hmm. And so I saw the documentary. I went to a screening event down in Brooklyn. Shout out to the Gentleman's Factory that hosted it. And from there, we, myself and another officer connected, and we were like, yo, how do we bring this to the South Bronx? And that's kind of where we landed with this. So we have an event coming up, and it's essentially to do the screening, but also have a conversation with the community about the relationships that we have with that precinct in particular and other officers that we encounter, because a lot of the relationships we have aren't good relationships, right? They aren't beneficial. And so how do we create a space to have a safe conversation that we know is going to get heated, and we expect that, but we want both entities to be able to share their voices so that they feel heard and just have a real fruitful conversation about these issues and how we can move forward.
And these are officers that have spoken out against, for example, the quota system and the NYPD.
Yeah.
And even themselves are facing crazy backlash and consequences within their own team.
Yeah, I can't say to what extent, but the documentary highlights some of the backlash that they faced, and highlights one person's story in particular as he was trying to move up in the ranks, and largely people of color who were kind of speaking out about this. They're all known as the NYPD 12, some dope folks, and so it's a reality again that goes back to what we were saying when we're trying to navigate all these spaces, right? And what happens when you try to speak out or share the voice or advocate on behalf of folks, there's always someone on the other end that probably doesn't want that to happen. And those are the spaces that we're trying to figure out how to navigate.
What is your vision? Like, what do you want to impact? What do you want to change? And even apart from your individual role in all of this, what do you think are some of the, like, if you could name top 3 things that need to change within the education system, or even within culture, and within society, within urban settings that really need to change in order for us to get to a way more equitable place? And and if you could define equitable and explain what that even...
Yeah. So equitable is the equal distribution of resources. Everyone having access to the same resources, right? And so that's how I would define equitable, right? But 3 things that I think we can do. One is just raise awareness, right? Just continue to inform each other. Continue to support each other and empower each other, just to learn about what's going on. What you're doing right now is awareness, right? It's saying, I'm going to start a podcast where I get a chance to inform Black and brown communities about all these different topics that we never get a chance to talk about when we grow up, right? Or in our communities. So awareness, right? Where are the resources? Showing that, exposing folks to that. I think that's one. I think 2 is... as hard as it is, like, just staying up to date with politics, man. Like, know what's going on, because know what's going on in your local communities, in your city, across the country, etc. Because that plays a big role in the direction of education, or direction in which society moves in general. So definitely just staying up to date with what's going on, and in how it impacts you, right? So I think that's important. And if I had to choose a 3rd thing, I think I would, and I would make this specific to education, but it's really about, like, the material that we teach. How do we change that? How do we make it more relevant for students? How do we reflect our students in the curriculum? And even thinking about other ways to evaluate how our students are doing that's not always just solely based on exams. I think there's such a big emphasis here in New York State on exams that impact students, right? When you're talking about high school graduation, when you're talking about college enrollment, how do we start to look at other things that we could really call out that our students do well? So overall curriculum in that 3rd piece.
Okay. So I think we hit on a lot of topics today.
So much.
I think probably each thing we spoke about could be a whole course,
OD,
right, in
OD.
itself.
Whole semester.
It's a really complex array of topics that I feel like it's very important for us to be understanding, especially for people who are from the hood or who are still in the hood, et cetera, et cetera.
As I continue to get involved with some of this work, a lot of the events that become public and stuff, I'm going to share with my man Joel, who will inform all of you about all these dope events, so we can just continue to raise awareness and push an agenda.
Shout out, what's your Instagram again?
IG, my IG is Nice Guy J. I just started the Twitter not too long ago. I need to get active on that. You can follow me on Nice Guy J there as well. And then I'm on LinkedIn, so just Jason Acosta, and that's it.
Yeah. Are you easy to, if somebody reaches out to you?
Yeah. I'm easily accessible. I ain't nowhere near where I'm gonna be in the future. But I'll always be accessible. I'll always be accessible, man. just hit me.
Yo, so thank you for being on the show. You already know.
Yo.